Hey guys, this is National Master Kevin Ye back at it with another video. So this is the second part, of course, of our analysis against the games of MLG chess. So I told you that we got to this position where, remember how I said I want to bring the bishop back, but e5 will trap the queen. So if you remember that from last video, this is where we're going to start off. So after d5, which I make, I let my opponent bring the wall in. I retreat, c3, bishop e7. And now we have to notice one thing. We have to notice that this bishop is much worse than this guy. And it's important that white keeps this guy. So for example, I could play the move bishop a6 here, right? This is a positionally good move for black. The reason being that this bishop is really bad right now. And if you trade a bad bishop with a good bishop, that helps black. It doesn't help white. So the best move for white, according to Engine, is just move it back. It's because this bishop is so bad. This bishop wants to trade, right? So now black could play something like c5, maybe get the knight out, maybe get the queen out this way, or maybe get the rook out, but white has ideas of queen c2, going for the h7 square, and after g6, something like knight f4 might begin, right? Attacking this square, even though there's this is much stronger. And I can show you, because after bishop takes f1, knight takes g6, this side is gone. The queen is going to come down, right? So that's just a preview. So instead, our friend played rook c1, and I said, let's proceed with my plan. I'm going to expand on this side a little bit, and after knight g3, a little bit of inaccuracy, because now I get bishop a6. Trading, forcing the trade, because I'm going to take the rook next turn. So I would say, at this point, maybe just bring the bishop back. Really hard move to find, right? Even knight f4 could work. But now, after bishop a6, like I said before, bishop b1 probably could work, or something like that. I don't know. Bishop b1, and after bishop takes, queen c2. Just remember, this is much more powerful than me taking the rook. So, just wanted to let you know what I thought. But in this position, you think, can I do the same thing? Takes, queen c2. Unfortunately, no. The reason being is that now this knight is here, not here. It's here. And so I can play g6 here, knowing that this knight cannot take this anymore. This knight's here now. So he can only go here, he can only go here, and then here. But it'll take a while. But look at what black can do in that time. Here, here, here. Get the knight here, or slide the queen over, or get the king up. Those are all possibilities that black can go with. But when we look at this scenario, and after black plays g6, there's no time. White just takes it right away. There's no time for this preparation. So that's what the difference is. So let's go back to the game. Our fellow club member MLG Chess tried to play c4. Very interesting move, in fact. Now here I considered a few options. I considered, do I take on d4? Do I bring my knight up? Do I take the pawn? Or do I take the pawn? So let's examine our options. I first thought, what if I take this way? Then, what about this guy? Right? So it's very sneaky that my rook could be trapped. And then I thought, c3? Let me just discover that rook for a second. Bishop takes, c takes b2. Threaten both rooks. And after rook b1, bishop takes rook, king takes rook, something like knight a6, but now the bishop gets out, and white is much better here. So, threw that option out of the boat. Now what about knight c6? Knight c6, put some pressure on here, right? So first thing I thought was, what if white just takes here? Threatens the knight. Then I play bishop takes, queen takes, queen takes. After something like rook d1, then I could play rook d8, continue the pressure. Really good. I thought knight c6 was okay. But I was a little bit more convinced by the move bishop takes c4, because I wanted to keep the pressure on this pawn, but I also wanted to trade down this bishop right away. Didn't want to give it any opportunity. So after bishop takes, pawn takes, rook takes, I played queen d5. I wanted to bring the knight out, wanted to bring the rook out, keep my options open. So after b3, I brought my rook out. Continue the pressure. That's what I was thinking. Knight e2. Very interesting, in fact. Guarding the pawn, providing more support, perfectly fine. Here, I would, however, suggest move the queen out of the way. That's the hardest move to see, because you have to realize that if I take here, the rook takes the pawn, and this is good for white, because now it's very interesting, because after, let's say, queen c6, rook takes d8, bishop takes d8, then something like queen f4 could happen, right? With the idea of bringing the rook out. And look how dysfunctional these pieces are. So that's just something. So the first thing you have to ask yourself as white here is, what is my opponent threatening? Well, the one thing I'm threatening right now is bringing the knight out and taking the pawn, right? So how do I get myself out of the threat? Now, although knight e2 might protect the pawn, the simplest move is to move the queen out of danger, because I base this threat based upon this pin. If queen takes, rook takes, rook takes, and I get an extra rook. So just move the queen out, and then if knight c6 happens this time, now you can take, because there's no more of that. And after bishop takes, you can play knight e4. Put some pressure on the bishop, rook and knight, rook, bishop, and knight. So it's very interesting. Even just sliding the queen might have been slightly better. So let's go back to the game. So knight e2 happened, and I sort of thought, okay, white is going to move the queen next move. I should move the queen first. So I move the queen, let the rook continue to do its job, and maybe start pushing for the side push of b5, right? But more importantly, I want to develop my knight out, get the rook up, get this other rook in, because this is my main goal right now. So after a4, very good prophylaxis preventing this pawn from advancing, but we'll see it later as a sort of weakness. And it's not that easy to see that this pawn is going to be a weakness, but by being able to prevent b5 at first is a very interesting concept as well. So I played knight c6, following my plan that I'm going to build up on this pawn, right? You see that white is spending all these pieces to defend this one pawn, and I'm doing all I can to attack it. So let's see how it goes. Queen c1. Perfect. Move the queen out of the attack. But maybe a little bit late. So after knight a5, I start harassing the weak pawn. And by here, I start to realize maybe there's a trick. And so after rook c3, protecting the pawn, I play queen a6, make a little bit of a sidestep. I say, I want to attack your knight. And the trap is, I want my opponent to bring the rook out. But in fact, moving the queen to any one of these squares, or to this square to protect the knight, is good enough. It's probably one of the better moves. Now, because if you move the knight, I take the pawn, right? And what our MLG chess played in the game was the other move that I had a trick for. So after rook e1, I took on d4. Because here's the thing. I could have also played c4 with the idea of bishop b4, but I decided take and then bishop b4. So after knight takes, right, so we have to realize this is a very hard move to spot. Why? Why do you think this capture is different from this capture? What is so different about it? And I can tell you something. It's all part of this thing called planning. Now, you might not see it, but if you take this way, and I play the same thing, guess what shows up? Rook g3. And you might think, okay, what if I just take here? And the answer is, look at that. Look at that. The rook pins the pawn to the king, and this pawn is weak now. After bishop takes, queen takes h6. It is suddenly game over for black. So I can't do that. So if our MLG chess played knight, the other knight takes d4, that would have been a brilliant move. I would probably have to trade the rooks and then deal with this pawn. But this capture helped me out more, because after bishop b4, I got the rook, and there's no specific attack. Although I did say in the game, queen f4, threaten f7, rook f8, knight takes e1, rook c8. Now I get to free out my pieces a little bit. So that sort of helps me again. So in the game, bishop b4. So let's let the game go on. And now at this moment, I'm sort of released from this pressure here, because the rook only has one square, right? So the rook goes, I play knight c6. I want to trade the knight. I want to trade the rook. Our friend MLG Chess just misses the rook, and I, next move, take the rook, and with, knowing that he hung his rook, there was a resignation. So, let's think about what mistakes were made in this game. So, not much, really. I think it was played very well. Maybe the bishop on d3 was not to be traded, but other than that, it was just me applying pressure to the center that really gave me this advantage. And so if you'd like to know more, thank you for listening, because I'll hear more about everything you want to say. So, thank you.